I want to welcome you and welcome our guests and our panel members to this symposium. It's meant to be very exploratory and discussion-oriented. We do have formal presentations, but I'm hoping that if you have interesting thoughts or observations that you'll be, or a question, you can bring them up within reason so we can keep going and have more time at the very end to speak. This is part of a week-long or nearly a week-long series of meetings and events with our colleagues from Chile, from the University of Chile and the Catholic University of Chile, Santiago. And they're meeting with others on campus under this rubric of the title of this symposium, what is the evolving public role? Oh, it's not on? Oh, okay. What is the evolving public role of our respective universities? And we've taken a lens. The lens we're using is to look at a public and a private in Chile, obviously the two that I mentioned, and Stanford and Berkeley as well, as a way to kind of discuss these this rather large topic. I do want to note that we're very thankful for the support and help of the Center for Latin American Studies here on campus, along with the social science matrix here at Berkeley, and the Chile-California Council, which has provided some support for a reception that will follow at the end of our discussion. And I also want to note thanks to Juan Ibanez at the California Chile Council, and as well as Mariana Ensuea at CLAS, the Center for Latin American Studies. So I'm going to make a short introduction of our panel members, and then to say a few words else about an interesting previous study in collaboration between UC and the University of Chile, and then we'll move into our program, which will start with a panel group and presentation from our friends from Chile. In the Chile group, as you see up on the screen, we have Carolina Guzman, who is at the Center for Advanced Research and Education at the University of Chile. I should note that she also co-edited a recent new book that came out with Routledge called Universities in a Time of Flux, an exploration of time and temporality in university life. So this is a new book that just came out. I do have a chapter in it too, so that's always good to PR these things. We also have Rosa Divas, who is the biochemist and professor of biophysics in the School of Medicine and the provost at the University of Chile, so we're very honored to have her here. She has been at the University of Chile, I believe, since 1980 and is a member of the Chilean Academy of Sciences. We also have Andreas Bernasconi, who is at the Center for Research and Educational Policy and Practice at the Catholic University of Chile. He's the director of that. He has a background in law, sociology, and also public policy, so quite a broad range. I should note that he is also a contributor in a chapter of a book that I am editing that's coming out on the flagship university, and he looks with his colleague at the flagship or leading universities in their history and future in Chile. So that's another PR for a book. Then we have Carol Christ on the Berkeley team, who is the new Center for Studies in Higher Education director. She's been at Berkeley since 1970 and has had many important roles, including provost for the Berkeley campus from 1994 to 2000, and then a very long and productive presidency at Smith College before coming back to her home roots here in Berkeley. Then we also have Henry Brady, who is the Dean of the Goldman School of Public Policy, and has been in that position for a number of years. I should note he also has a recent book, The Unheavenly Chorus, Unequal Political Voice and the Broken Promise of American Democracy. So that may be of interest to you. And then we have Judd King, who is well known to many of you as well, and he is the former director at the Center for Studies in Higher Education, and has also many other titles over time, but one that we list here is he was the provost for the entire University of California system for a good many years, and has vast experience with the university's management and governance issues. And then from our friends from Stanford, we have Martin Kornoy, who has been at Stanford since 1968, very well-known and high-profile economist looking in issues of political economy and education systems with experience in Latin America, broadly defined, but also with Chile as well. So that's a really great panel we have. So I think we're going to have a very interesting and exciting discussion. I do want to say that we had a discussion last night over dinner, and as I was trying to organize some of these activities, I got an email from Chuck Young, who's the former chancellor at UCLA, a very prominent person who has really made UCLA a significant player in the world. And he was chancellor from about 63 to, or 64 to about 30 years, I think it was. It was a tremendous run before doing many other things, a very powerful personality, let's put it that way. I know some of you know of him or know him. And he reminded me that there had been a very significant collaboration funded by the Ford Foundation, over $9 million over this period. That's in those dollars, you know, and count inflation, it would be a larger number, but in which there was a collaboration between the university system as a whole and the University of Chile. And that my understanding is at least that this had a very significant effect on the development of the University of Chile and higher education generally there. Chuck told the staff down at UCLA to send me a copy of the various reports, and so here's one of them. There's a lot. It was a very broad program, partly based on developing, I think, the sciences at the University of Chile, but also many collaborations across many different fields. So that we have this long link that goes back, actually the original concept was one that was during Clark Kerr's time as president of the University of California, and he was involved in its early generation. And Chuck Young led the council that chaired the group for many years as well. So I just wanted to note that interesting collaboration. Perhaps we'll hear a note or two from our Chilean colleagues about this. So my only other thing I want to say before we launch into our presentation from our Chilean colleagues is that there is a lot going on in Chile. There's a lot going on in California, but there's significant reforms and let's say, well, protests by students and this kind of thing going on in Chile, rooted in a proposal by President Michelle Bachelet to have free education in all forms, K through 12 up through higher education. And the realities of actually implementing that are causing significant disruption, some based, and I think we'll hear more about this, based on how, if those dollars are distributed, are they only for low-income students? Are they for all students? What about publics versus privates? So this is a major issue going on currently in Chile. We'll talk a little bit more about California's troubles and woes later. So with that, Carolina?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you very much. And good afternoon to everybody. We are very, very pleased to be here. I think we are in a starting point, and we really hope that this research network develops for a long, long period of time. And we are here in order to explore the public dimension of universities. And so what we are going to do right now, Andres is going to start the presentation. He's going to talk about some basic data about universities in Chile, so you can get a a general sense about the higher education system in Chile, and then I will continue the presentation with the idea of the public and its relationship with universities. So,
thank you, Olivia.
If you want, you can stand or stand.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. It's very good to have you here. We're very grateful for the possibility to be here. Thanks, John, for your introduction and your kind reception of this group from Chile. We thought that it might be useful, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the concept of the public and how that relates to universities in Chile, to give you a little bit of background on our country. I'm sure you all know about Chile, but just in case there's people present here who are new to the region or to the country, we will show a little bit of that. I have to pass that. No, because it's not nice to be.
To the right. To the right. Take the one to the right.
Oh, okay. Super. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to say something about Chile as a country and its economy, and then a little bit about the system in Chile, the system of higher education, how universities are funded, some information on their performance, and then I'll hand it over to Carolina to discuss the work that we are doing to understand better what is meant by the concept of public in the field of higher education, particularly in the field of university and universities. This is a nice map of apparently the quote is real. So I think Kissinger was right about the very limited geopolitical importance of Chile. That having said, it has had a very interesting political history and political economic changes over time, especially beginning in the late 60s and then into the Allende government in the 70s, the military coup in 73, the military dictatorship and the shift to neoliberal policies, the return to democracy, and what has happened since. And some argue that student unrest and the rise of a new left in Chile is connected to the sort of later effects of the military regime and its legacy in terms of the rejection of what remains of that model of development and social organization. Chile is no longer a poor country in terms of how these things are measured. It's a member of the OECD, and it's classified as a middle-income country with the highest per capita GDP in Latin America, adjusted by purchasing power. Let's say something about higher education now. The higher education system in Chile is largely private. There's about 160 institutions of higher education, and only 16 of them are public institutions. They are all universities, but we have also professional institutes and technical training centers. The last ones are sort of community college type of institution. So you have the numbers there. Enrollments have grown quite dramatically since the beginning of the 90s. We have a net rate of enrollment of close to 50% and a gross rate of enrollment of around 70%. And you can see the breakdown in terms of attendance to universities and to non-university institutions of higher education. It's about half and half these days. Now you can see here well, you can't see anything, but you can believe that this chart speaks of the expansion of enrollment, especially in the last years, due to a new funding system for students that consists of a loan that's guaranteed by the state, by the government. So a student doesn't need a collateral to get the loan because the government acts as the collateral for the students. And that meant a major breakthrough. At the time, I was doing institutional research. This was in the mid-2000s. I was an institutional researcher, and we thought that the student population at the higher education system was reaching its zenith at about 600 students nationwide. Well, at about that time, this new scheme became available, and that number doubled. So we failed miserably to anticipate how numbers would change over time. And the chairman of the National Council of Education said yesterday that presenting data on evolution of enrollments in Chile in the past few years, he said that he believed that we are now at a point in which we should not expect further growth on the segment of higher education due to a combination of demographic elements and also availability of resources, even with tuition-free higher education, which is what the government is proposing. Now that we're talking about tuition-free higher education, it happened that Chile had a tuition-free universities for most of its history. Then towards the early 70s, this was defined as the sort of prevalent mode of access. There was some experimentation with diversified imposition of tuition fees for students who could pay, especially in private universities, but that disappeared towards the beginning of the 70s. And then Pinochet introduced tuition in both public and private institutions, and tuition has been growing beyond inflation, as has been the case here, for many, many years, at a point in which, according to the OECD, tuition levels in Chile are the highest in the world after US private universities, not public, but private, measured in dollars of the same purchasing power. So families make a big effort to send their children to universities and technical training centers and professional institutes. And we have this sort of strange funding arrangement whereby private institutions get direct funding, not for the students or for research, which is found in many other countries, but they get subsidies for regular operation, sort of unconditional block grant funding from the government since 1923. And more unusual is the fact that confessional universities get public funding in a country where there's separation between church and state. So my university gets not a lot, but about 8% of its funding in this way from direct transfers from the government. So that's sort of unusual internationally, but nonetheless, this public funding is insufficient. All institutions charge tuition to their students, and they do their best to offer services to industry, and in that way make for the difference between costs and income by the government. So we have like the US, we have a high tuition, high financial aid system in Chile, which is what the government wants to change now. The idea is that higher education would be tuition free for some students in some institutions. The students are meant to be those that are among the 60% poorer. We don't know if that means in each institution or as a whole, but that would be the threshold, 60%. And eligible institutions, they're being defined as we speak, which are those, but it seems that like it's going to be the older, the publics plus the older privates, and perhaps a few new privates that are certifiably not for profit, and then professional institutes and technical training centers under the same conditions, that they demonstrate that they are non-profits.
Can I add
Sure.
a little idea? I think it's important to say that some private universities in Chile receive more money than state universities. So it's a big paradox in Chile. State universities, I'm not talking about the University of Chile, I'm talking about other state universities which are very poor across the country, and they receive less money from the state than some private universities. I think it's very important to remark that point.
Thanks. You can see here tuition fees, how they, especially at universities, universities are, I'm sorry,
That one.
are at the top, the top segment. So the average is this is yearly fees. It's about $5,000 in universities, and about $2,000 in professional training centers and professional institutes, which are the curves at the lower part of the chart. Well, that means that spending in higher education in Chile is rather high in comparative terms, but this is because the OECD considers both public and private funding in its calculations. So if you consider public and private, the funding for higher education in Chile is around 2.5% of GDP, but then the part that's only public, it's around 0.7 of GDP, and the rest is all private. That is to say, mostly tuition based. Now, just to get into the two universities that we represent here, these are some figures that we put together. They try to show a profile of some of the key numbers for Universidad de Chile and the Catholic University of Chile, and compared to Unicamp, which is a university in Brazil, more or less of the same size, and roughly comparable in terms of research orientation to Universidad de Chile and Catholic University of Chile. Plus, these three universities and Sao Paulo tend to be the ones that appear at the top of the Latin American rankings of universities. So you can see that unlike a university as Campinas, which was created to be mostly a graduate school, our universities still have very low numbers for graduate students. And even if this may have increased in the past few years, we're still basically undergraduate universities, or universities dedicated to undergraduate education with doctoral work in addition to undergraduate training. But perhaps the largest difference between our two universities in Chile and the idea of a research university is our faculty. The proportion of the faculty who have doctorates is still a minority if you consider all faculty. Now, if you consider only full-time faculty, then you approach 50% or more. But we still have a long way to go to have a faculty that's dominantly trained at the PhD level. And in part because of that, productivity in terms of research paper has increased, but it's still way lower than what you would expect of a university with some 3,000 faculty members as Universidad de Chile and Universidad Católica. Same thing with PhDs conferred. There's a 1 order of magnitude difference with Campinas. So if we produce 100 or so PhDs a year, they are around 800 or 1,000. And then you have some figures on funding.
It's the other one.
No, but this is that show the budget of the University of Chile as of 2011 and Catholic University at the same time. And you see there's a substantial growth in funding. This is all self-generated funding much more than government support. Although government support has been channeling its contribution through student aid. So there's universities have been able to increase tuition largely because the government has been putting money into student aid. I think that's all from me. Let's hand it over to Carolina.
Is it any better if I stay here?
It's up to you.
So I can look at your faces. Well, I'm very short, so. Well, so the idea now is starting a conversation about the public. What is public? I would like to hear your ideas about the possible definitions about public.
I think the mic is very directional, so you have to be.
So I cannot move.
Just hold it.
Hold on.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah, if you want to.
So, okay, I'm going to repeat what I said. The idea is initiating a discussion about the public. What is public? What do you think the concept of public?
State supported.
State supported. Okay, what else? Is only that?
Serving the public in various and variety of ways. Because I just not
Serving the public, open access. What else?
Owned by the public.
Owned by the public. But by the state?
The state.
The state. What else? It's public.
Admit people from public schools?
Okay, yes.
structuring their programs to meet labor needs of the state or other needs such as economic development, tech transfer.
Subject to an increasing level of state scrutiny and control.
Everyone winced.
Dedicated to the public good.
Dedicated to the public good. Well, when one reads the literature, it's possible to find different kind of definitions. So you can see that there isn't one definition about the public, and the concept itself is related to historical issues, financial issues, cultural issues as well. So what we can say is that the concept itself is dynamic. It's not a static concept. So what I would like to do now is showing different kind of definitions of the public. So in the first place, one definition is public is what is owned by the state. It's a legal perspective. So since the state is the owner, in this case, the university will be a property of the state. Yeah. It's very common to find this definition in general, even in the common sense. You know, when I talk about public universities, people tend to think of state universities, and this is the legal perspective. Nevertheless, as you know, the state has been cutting across the world the funding to universities. I don't know how to use the link here. Can I do it or not?
Maybe
I need
is
to,
it that one? It's
I think it's this
No,
one.
it's
No?
over there. Yeah.
Here.
Yep.
Oh, the link.
Oh, no.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether you can see very much here, but what I want to show is that along the years, during the, for example, since the 1990s and then the 2000, I think is, cannot see it, I think it's 2003, you can see a tendency in which, for example, in the 90s, the state in some OECD countries, these are OECD countries. You can see, I'm going to read from the slide here because I cannot see anything. For example, New Zealand is the first one. Is it the pointer? Yes. New Zealand. Yes, then we have Sweden, then the UK, then is Belgium, here, Austria. Well, so you can see that in the 90s, the universities in these countries were completely funded by the state. Yes, and then on the opposite side, we have countries such as Korea here, Japan, and USA is here, okay, in the 90s. Chile is not here because Chile became part of the OECD in 2010. But then this tendency changed in 2003. So you can see that in the same countries, the state funding has been decreasing. So the first country here is Austria, then Sweden, Belgium, United Kingdom. And on the opposite side, more or less, the same countries, Korea, Japan, and USA, these three countries. Gosh, what happened here? No. But here we are in 2009. And you can see again that this state funding has been decreasing even more. So Belgium, for example, is here, then Sweden, Austria, Slovak Republic, and on the opposite side again, Korea and the UK. The case of UK is quite interesting, and the way that the state funding has been cut and decreased. So what I want to show you is that it's not something that is happening only in Chile or California. It's happening around the world. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's a fact. So probably saying that, taking into account this cut of funding coming from the state, perhaps it's not possible to talk about state universities as public universities, trying to put in the same definition. Okay, public university is a state university because probably the money is not coming anymore from the state, and there are hybrid schemes of funding. I don't know whether you have understood what I have said. I mean, it's not possible to say that state universities are public universities anymore, probably. But I have to say that when I say this, when I express this idea in countries in continental Europe, for example, it's a very odd expression. People from Germany think, no, public is a state university. It's obvious. State universities are public universities, and it's not possible to talk about private universities which are public universities. Yes. So again, it depends on the historical issues and geographical issues, and it's not possible to say anymore, probably, at least in Chile, that only state universities are public universities. There is another perspective, which is the economic perspective, that makes a distinction between public goods for the public good. Well, it's a distinction that Simon Martinson from the Institute for Education makes. And in this case, public goods are goods and services that are available for everybody without distinction, no rivalry. That means that their use does not reduce availability to others, and non-exclusion. Use by others cannot be prevented. For example, a public free library. Yeah? If I go to a library and they lend me a book, I can read it, and other person can do the same, and it's a public good for everybody. But those are public goods, plural. There is the concept of public good, singular, and it refers to the idea of the benefit for the whole society. So here we can talk about public goods for the public good, the benefit of the society. That is another definition that, that you gave me as well when we started the conversation. What happens about knowledge? Knowledge and the university. Knowledge is a public good, but not always, because sometimes we have to pay for knowledge, or sometimes knowledge has become a commodity. So sometimes knowledge can be a public good for the public good, but not always, because of the commodification of knowledge. So there is an interesting discussion about knowledge and universities. And the same thing for knowledge and the idea of educating professionals, for example. We educate professionals for the society, but some people tend to think that it's just because I want a profession and I want to get a nice salary and it's for my benefit and not necessarily for the society. There is a very nice definition that I like very, very much from Habermas. And here, the concept of public is related to discussion. It's a public space in which citizens engage in conversations, autonomous conversations, and citizens give their different points of view or perspectives about a topic, I don't know, politics, economy, or whatever, and they discuss. It's like having a public space, for example, a university, a place in the university, or a square, or a library, or whatever, where people are discussing different issues. This concept, if we try to relate this concept of public sphere and university, for example, we can find very interesting definitions. For example, the creation of a public sphere in the classroom, through which teachers and students engage in conversations and they share different values, perspectives, ideologies, positions, and with respect, of course, and respecting this diversity. And that is, for example, a very nice way of conceptualizing the public in the university. Of course, there are other ways, but that is one way. Another possibility is conceptualizing the public and the university when we refer to the commitment of the university to the society. So the idea is that the university works in a very closely way with the local community or even the global community. And for example, from this definition, in the literature we can find concepts such as the civic university, the public engagement of the global university. And perhaps I'm wrong, but I have heard of the third mission of the university, which is a very, I have heard that in the United States, the concept of third mission is quite important. It's not only teaching and research.
I would just say that it's an alien thought in the American context, because it's always been a mission, especially in the historical development of the public universities and land grants, of public service. So that the third mission, the way it's used and the way that language is used in Europe and other places, it's like this is an additional idea. It's a new idea for the university to be engaged publicly. But for us, like, people go, third mission, what? Because it's such a core value of the origins of our land grant institutions in particular, but all, private institutions as well. That's what I would say.
There is another perspective related to, I would say, is between a philosophical perspective and civic perspective, or even a political perspective about the public commitment of the university and the society. And it's, again, the idea of producing knowledge for the local community. I don't produce knowledge, the university doesn't produce knowledge only because, because the university wants to help to cover health issues or things like that. It's because the university can work together with the local community to solve very specific and practical problems. And for example, there is a very nice concept about students working together with teachers in order to create this knowledge. So from this point of view, students are not conceived as consumers, but as producers of knowledge for a local community. And that is a very nice concept as well. That can be taken into account when we are discussing about the public on the university. There is another concept of the public that I am personally exploring. I'm very interested in this concept, especially because I come from Chile, which is a very stratified and segmented country. And it's related to the access to higher education. So as Andres mentioned, Chile has basically universities, centers of technical formation and professional institutes. And that is a very stratified system. So lower classes go to these professional institutes and centers of technical formation, and I wouldn't say rich people, of course not, but people with better incomes have the possibility to pay the university because the tuition fee is quite high. In Chile, we have a discussion and a distinction between complex universities versus teaching-oriented universities. In general, most of the new private universities in Chile, I'm generalizing, there are exceptions of course, most of these new private universities that appear in the 80s and the 90s are teaching-oriented universities. And the complex universities will be the University of Chile, the Pontificia Universidad Católica, because these universities conduct research, and they do teaching, research, and commitment with the society, cultural activities. So it's not just teaching. There are traditional universities, the universities that Andres was describing, which are the oldest universities, and most of them are more prestigious than new universities. And these traditional universities receive basically the money from the state, and they are either private or state universities. On the other hand, the certification, exactly as Andres mentioned, is quite high in Chile. Why? Because we have a national entrance examination for students, and students with the highest scores go to the more prestigious universities. Why? Because they studied in private schools. Of course, their social and cultural capital was higher. They come from the richest families, and usually they go to the most prestigious universities. And on the contrary, students with poorest scores go to teaching-oriented universities, these new private universities. So basically what I want the idea that I want to communicate today is that there is a public dimension of universities related to trying to get a more equal society. And my vision, and this is my personal vision, is that in Chile, universities are not promoting a more equal society. On the contrary, universities are reinforcing and consolidating a very stratified country. Universities are not promoting social changes in that sense. Anyway, having said that, those are theoretical definitions. I want to show a bit of the data we are collecting in Chile. I'm conducting another research about the public role of universities in Chile, and we've got a lot of data from magazines, university missions, documents of public policies, and some documents by students unions. And what we are doing basically is a critical discourse analysis in order to explore the different definitions about the public university. And of course, our thesis is that there are different ideological positions, and according to that, definitions might change. So in a very general way, because this is a work in process, but basically the kind of definitions we have found is that the public is conceived or is linked to the production of scientific knowledge for the benefit of the broader society, so the idea of the public good, benefit of the society, the idea of the formation of professionals as both an individual good and a public good. Yes, so I educate professionals because the formation and education is a public good for individual benefit, but as well for a broader benefit. And the idea of public service, which is a discourse very present right now in all universities, both private and state universities, public service. The analysis of documents of public policies in higher education. What we did basically is taking two important documents, one from 1990 and the other one from 2008. And in the 1990, democracy, Pinochet left. The Pinochet regime finished in 1989. And in that document, basically, the public is referred to financial issues. Public is state funding, basically, in the 90s. And in 2008, we found a kind of turn in the discourse. Public is not only public funds, but it's related to the public dimension. Actually, in the documents, they use the expression public dimension of university. And that opens the door, because that means that private universities can have a public dimension as well, not only state universities. So there is an important turn in the discourse. Well, we are analyzing university missions. We have 60 universities in Chile. So we are analyzing 60 missions, and surprisingly, the concept of public doesn't appear very much. And we were expecting we thought, we are sure that this concept will be all around, and no, we are wrong. The concept of public itself doesn't appear very much. And when it appears, it refers to the production of public goods for the benefit of the society, which is a very traditional definition. Then, our third source, magazine articles. I have to confess that this is the most interesting part. We have collected a lot of items from two. One is an online magazine, and the other one is a very conservative newspaper. And this was quite interesting because it was crystal clear, the difference between political positions and ideological positions. So the conservative position, represented by El Mercurio, this very conservative newspaper, shows that all this discussion about students trying to get free education is very regressive, is the idea that the magazine tries to show. And basically what is said, that global tendencies show that this hybrid public-private provision for universities is the global tendency, is a fact, and everybody should go there instead of regressing. Basically, what they say is that Chile is going to regress if it is offered free education for higher education students. And the other idea that appears very much is that all the universities, both public and private, are public universities because they create public goods for the public good. Of course, most of the people who write for that paper, academics, they come from private universities. Yes. But then we have this other magazine. It's called El Mostrador. It's a left-oriented online magazine. And basically, this magazine has a denouncing role. And what it's saying is that there is a lack of regulation from the state. And the public role of the state is not only about giving money to university, it's about regulating universities as well. In Chile, there have been a lot of scandals about the accreditation system. We have a national accreditation system. It's a quality assurance system that was created in 2006. And in order to get state funds, it's necessary to get this accreditation seal. So some private universities try to get this accreditation seal in order to get fresh money from the state. But it was discovered a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2013, that some private universities were paying, literally, paying and buying the accreditation seal. So there have been a lot of scandals, and now it has discovered that this system is very corrupted. At the same time, from the point of view of this magazine, public education is conceived as a social right, and it should be free for everybody. That is another perspective that is highlighted by this magazine. And we were very curious about this last idea. In this paper, it's possible to find as well the idea of both private and state universities having public aims or dimensions. We thought that this magazine would say that only state universities were public, but no. So definitely we think that in Chile there has been a kind of turn of the concept, in the conceptualization of public. Students, well, students are another world, and their ideas are quite different. For them, public education is a tuition-free education and is a high-quality education for everybody, and that is public in the university. Free education and high-quality education. They have been protesting for years, since 2011, in order to modify the relationship between the state, the private sector, and the higher education system. And I think that this is quite interesting because only the students have been able to do this in Chile. Academics have been, and I include myself, very quiet. But the students are making a lot of noise about the need of regulation from the state. Students are claiming for more regulation. It's not only about money, regulation, because of all these scandals I was mentioning. And a second important idea on the part of students is the idea of the university as a democratic institution. Students want more spaces to express their ideas, to organize themselves. So, for example, student unions for them are very, very important. And there have been some discussions about why some private universities in Chile are prohibiting student unions, for example. And that is an interesting discussion on the part of students. So, to sum up, it seems that public does not mean anymore unnecessarily state funding or state ownership it seems that public means much more than that. Public might mean regulation from the state, but it seems that it's more related nowadays with a public dimension. Yes, the relationship between the university and the society, the local community. In Chile, it's very important the concept of freedom and public choice. So there is a kind of conflict between regulation and freedom, and probably that is a point of tension in Chile. Some people think that if the state regulates a lot, that is limiting freedom and the idea and the capacity to choose different kind of have different choices, and that is related to individual freedom. And unfortunately, I think that there isn't a lot of discussion, except on the part of the students, about the idea of the public as the promotion of a more equal society, a more egalitarian society. It seems that in Chile, we have got used to this stratification. So there is a kind of naturalization of the discourse, and it doesn't matter if there is a big gap between rich and poor people. It's natural. It's how things are. And in my view, this discussion is not having a lot of, nobody's discussing very much this, or at least it's not in the magazines, in the missions, in the policy documents. The idea of a more egalitarian society is not present, and I think that in Chile we need a bit more of this idea. So I'm going to finish my presentation with some questions for the audience. And it would be very nice if we can discuss these questions, and then we can compare the cases of
We'll take a little less than 10 minutes so that we can reserve time at the end for discussion.
Yeah.
So
I'm just going to read them.
well, I think we can
Okay.
We can read.
Okay,
Let's
good.
go to the
and
audience.
so if you can keep these ideas in mind, and then we can continue the discussion. Yes. Yes. So that is.
Is there any discussion? Any questions?
Okay, you wanted the questions now. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Well, I thought we could just do a few questions just to break it up, so we don't always have, we're always speaking to the audience. If there's one or two questions or thoughts. Yes, Dick.
Among what you're characterizing as private universities, a large private sector in Chile, what percentage are institutions that are Catholic and have some historical significance, and what percentage are more recently developed institutions?
I can answer that. Oh, you want to answer? In total, there are 60 universities, and 25 are all and more traditional universities, and the rest are new private universities.
But 9 are Catholic.
9 are Catholic, and 16 are state universities.
I would say one thing, at least in the perspective that you have, which is going to be in contrast, I think, to what we present about Berkeley and the UC system, is you're looking very much at the external world and how stakeholders are viewing the public purposes of the institution. And I think a fundamental question, which I think partly aligns with what we see, or I'm saying with my colleagues, is that it's a very strong internal culture that drives the concept of public service. And so anyway, I just think that's a different perspective that we'll provide between the two presentations.
I was a bit worried at the end statement that there was naturalization of this segregated society? Because
there is a
the present government is really focused on equity and inclusion, and our students are on seats, and not just that, but the public policy has really reacted to this in a very, very strong way. So could you comment on that? Because we may get the wrong impression.
We are analyzing some documents, and if you analyze the return of the democracy in 1990, yes, and if you analyze the different governments from 1990 and today, there have been a long time without any kind of change in the discourse. Now, but this is very recent with this government. They are trying to do things in a different way. But for a long time, even left-oriented governments have been reinforcing neoliberal ideas. So, an hypothesis is that the neoliberal ideology has been naturalized for a long time, and that is why it hasn't been contested by any actor except the students in 2011. That is a long time, but now the government is trying to change that. Yes, definitely.
When Andres was comparing the University of Chile and the Catholic University, there was a twofold difference in the percentage of faculty who have PhDs. Is this telling us something about higher education in Chile?
Basically, what the numbers show is that if you take full-time faculty members and you look in that group who are PhD holders, it's around 50%. The Catholic University, for some reasons that escape my understanding, has been allowed to report as PhD holders its medical doctors who have a medical specialty. Well, not PhDs, they're just the other doctors. The real doctors, as my daughter used to say, unlike me. But if you remove those, the School of Medicine, basically, it's basically more or less the same. It's a little bit over 50%. And that is due to basically to a tradition of the Latin American university, not only in Chile. But if you look at numbers from Colombia or Argentina, it's going to be just like this. The only exception is Brazil. And the reason is because universities were created in Latin America to train professionals and public officers, and therefore the most valued faculty member was a practicing professional who would teach part-time. So we have lots of those still, and they're important because we give professional degrees for people to practice. So we have to have those in the faculty. So it's never going to be 100% PhD holders, I think, but probably, I don't know, maybe around 80%.
Maybe one more question? Oh.
This gentleman has a question.
Oh. One more and then we'll move on. Yes. Oh, it's him. One more. So go ahead.
Hi, my name is Andrew. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I just have one question. I found the last few comments about the equalitarian society very interesting, especially from a student perspective. And my question is, in your opinion, what are some of the most promising programs or initiatives for improving equity and access on campus?
And for example, in the University of Chile?
University of Chile or here?
Well, Rosa can answer that.
Yeah, Rosa can answer that, definitely.
In the last 4 years, there has been an effort from the part of the universities first, the government, then after that, of attending equity and inclusion in terms of, because we have a very segregated school system, and we realized, even in the University of Chile, which is essentially public university in Chile, that if we did not act specifically to engage, attract, give access to, and then support students that came from schools that were, or from underprivileged contexts, which means schools that are not academically very efficient, we would end up with a very homogeneous university, and not just with very bad university, actually. because it would not be sufficiently diverse and complex and so on. So we have started, since we have our admission system, it's national, and it's really totally guided by this test scores, and it's a computer that decides who goes where. We had to establish special programs, special entry programs. So, and the Catholic University did this also. It started in several universities with different kinds of programs. The one in the University of Chile, the more important one, is one that requires a certain score to get in, which is high, but we don't use the score to order the students. Once they comply with a certain score, then we give the highest priority to the students that come from the most vulnerable context. So it's a totally different way of choosing and selecting the students. But now there is another program, which is state policy, and it requires the university, 29 universities have been invited to join this program, where we will work with the students in the schools for 2 years, with the teachers actually, in the schools. And then out of this population, which is one school per district in the country, we will choose the 15% best students that will have access to universities. We still don't know how we're going to select them. So there is a change, big change now. And this is transforming the universities in the sense that, in a very, very profound way, because since we have invited students that don't have the academic preparation as the others, we have been, as you have, for some time, we have been responsible for creating support systems, but this is changing the relationship with the students in general. It's very interesting what's happening. So I think it will be a great benefit to universities in many ways, in many dimensions.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we need to move on to the next. Come on, let's have a round of applause for our Chilean colleague.